Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we piece together the transformation of work, one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today's conversation begins with a moment that jolts you into changing your career. A conversation that forces you to think, a promotion that doesn't feel like progress, a health scare, a new technology, a moment when you realize that the job you're in no longer fits the person you've become. Today's conversation is about the invisible trigger points that shape your personal journey in the evolving world of work. And for that conversation, I have a very special guest with me today. Anthony Klotz is a professor of organizational behavior at UCL School of Management in London. But you may recognize him since he's credited with coining what became known as the Great Resignation. Now, in his new book, Jolted, Why We Quit, When to Stay, and Why It Matters, he argues that careers are not shaped by slow dissatisfaction or careful planning. They are shaped by jolts. Anthony, welcome to Future of Less Work.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, I was really excited as I read this. So I talk a lot and I write a lot about the nonlinear careers and how AI shapes, value and the whole changing social contract. But when I read your book, it was like a missing piece of the puzzle, that one moment when we move from feeling into action. So let's start there. What's a jolt?
Yes, so a jolt is a moment. It's an event that causes us to stop and rethink our relationship with work. And that event could be big or quite small, and it could come from within our work lives, or it could come from our personal lives, or somewhere even further away. But the hallmark of jolts is they just cause us to pause and take a critical look at or rethink how we feel about our job, how we feel about work in general.
So give me some examples, or maybe, examples of types of jolts.
Yeah, so there's a number of different types of jolts, and they range from the ones that you may be thinking of right away, like direct jolts that happen to us at work. And so it's very natural that having a failure at work would cause you to stop and say, is this the right thing for me? Am I doing the right thing here? So that could be an example of a jolt. Also more subtle aspects of mistreatment in the workplace. So being treated rudely by a coworker, or realizing that you're being ostracized from your work group. Those could be moments where you realize my relationship with my organization or with my coworkers isn't what I thought it was. And that can cause you to think, maybe I'll do something different here. And then we get into the jolts that are a little bit further away from right in your job. So collateral jolts are those that emanate from something that happens to our coworkers. Most often when one of our coworkers quits or decides to quit, it often causes turnover contagion. So we think, where is that person going? Are they getting a better deal? Plus, I'm losing a good friend at work. Do I still feel the same way about my job without them being here? There are some more specific types of jolts as well. So like honeymoon jolts are those that happen within the first year on the job. Surprisingly, year one is the most common year for turnover across all industries. And further away, like outside of work, there's jolts that strike on the personal front, health issues like you mentioned, or just realizing that work has taken up far too much of our lives. It may be a small comment, perhaps from our partner or from one of our kids saying, it's too bad you missed my soccer game, or my football game last week. And that makes us realize, like, why did I miss that? I think I've got my priorities out of place here. And then finally, there's jolts that happen, even further away. So remote jolts, things that are happening halfway around the world that make us reflect and put our job in perspective and say, if that sort of important or tragic event is happening on the other side of the world, what am I doing this for 8 or 10 hours a day? It seems really small in comparison, and I want to do something different or more meaningful. And you might have picked up on, like, all of the jolts that I just mentioned are somewhat negative in nature. And that's because bad is stronger than good when it comes to events that impact our life. We tend to pay more attention to negative events and react more strongly to them. But there are positive jolts as well. So something like getting a promotion, having a milestone birthday where you turn 40 or 50 years old, or graduating from school, those are all moments that cause us to step back and reflect in a more positive light on what's going on. And reflecting in a positive light often leads to epiphanies. So these big changes.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you talk about this in the personal perspective, and I think a lot of the broader changes, because we used to tolerate this gap, right, between maybe what we wanted and what we had, and maybe we had these thoughts, but we didn't quite act on them. And it feels to me like COVID, for example, was a very big jolt that got everybody to realize that life is short. And
Yep.
every day we go to work is a day that we trade, right? And we see this changing the social contract of what people will tolerate in terms of their work, their life, and what they're giving up.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think it was too long ago where people spent much longer periods of time in what I would just call autopilot, where we go about our daily work lives without really questioning, is it the right thing for us? Could I upgrade? Is there a better career path out there? I think there's expectations now that our work provides a little bit more for us. I think if we go online, we can see constant examples of people quitting, saying that they're leveling up, switching jobs, what have you. And of course, that makes us think about it as well. And then also these events, like the pandemic, they come to us in the form of our phones, mostly in the midst of our work lives. So, most of us are looking at our phones right now multiple times a day at work and seeing these events that are going on in the world, and having these thoughts between the disconnect between important events outside of work, important events inside of work. And that sometimes makes us question, what am I doing with my time here?
Do all jolts lead to leaving necessarily? So is it always external facing resignation?
Certainly not. Only a relatively small subset of jolts will lead to quitting. I mean, most of us can think about many jolts that we've had in our career, especially if we think about the smaller ones. And a lot of the time, the right thing to do is actually to do nothing, to just realize, that told me something about my relationship with work that needs changing, but it doesn't need to change right now. I'm going to work toward that change, but I'm going to keep on the same path that I'm on. In other cases, it could lead to speaking up and saying to your boss or somebody in the organization, hey, I need this change to be made. And then it gets made. Or in other cases, you may realize, quitting isn't the right thing for me. But what I do need to do is sort of rebalance my work and life. And so I'm going to change things up a little bit. So and that's part of the premise of the book is when we experience these jolts, we have more options. We're more empowered than we think we are. These binary options of just, trudging along or quitting, that masks over a lot of actual options that we have to respond to jolts in ways that improve our relationship with work.
Again, it's funny to me how I see this perspective in the bigger picture. So when we shifted from the Great Resignation, there was the reshuffle when people went back to work, but then we called it quiet quitting. And I actually wrote an article at a time arguing that quiet quitting was actually renegotiating with your current employer instead of quitting and going to renegotiate with a new employer, right? So you're basically saying a jolt is just something that gets you to kind of wake up, take another look at your work and your life, and then ask, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And your insight that the forces underpinning the Great Resignation and quiet quitting are the same forces. These jolts, along with the traditional slow dissatisfaction that happens at work. And it's just showing that when the labor market is really good, it makes quitting easier. So during the Great Resignation times, that's what we were talking about. And then as the labor market started to freeze up a little bit, especially now when it feels pretty frozen, that option of quitting is either off the table or it's not a great option. And so people say, what other options do I have to deal with this? And quiet quitting is another option, leaning back from your work.
Yeah. Although I'd argue even sometimes that employers termed it that because it feels like leaning back. But the fact that a person says, I don't want to take a 6 p.m. meeting, and just because we always did doesn't make it right, is not leaning back. It's a renegotiation of the social contract of work.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. And I always, thought of it as a rebalancing. I think renegotiation makes sense. But a lot of it is, I talk about this term job creep, which is just over time, our jobs tend to grow and get bigger, and the extra parts of our jobs get bigger. And often with this renegotiation, it's looking at these extra tasks that have sort of built up around your job that maybe don't add value to you, maybe don't even add that much value to the organization, and saying, how am I smarter about my engagement in these things so that I, protect my well-being and protect from burnout. And, one of the best comments I saw when quiet quitting was being talked about was that when executives take time off for their well-being, we often call it, oh, they're protecting themselves from burnout. They're doing this for their well-being, so good for them. But when regular workers do it, then we might label it something like quiet quitting or something more negative. But yeah, it's this renegotiation really to protect ourselves in this fairly long run of a career that we hope to have.
Yep. And I think that kind of leads to the biggest jolt of all that we're all experiencing these days, which is the AI one, right? So if we bring this into the present, it feels like we're in the middle of a collective jolt again, but it's affecting different people in different ways. Do you think that will generate a new category that you haven't, included? Because I'm thinking it's almost like an external, out of nowhere kind of jolt, maybe like the pandemic,
Yeah. So I don't know if it's a different category. So I've talked to a number of people who are experiencing, let's just call them AI jolts right now. And sometimes, these are tech industry workers who are, learning these new technologies and having these, epiphanies that wow, the last 20 years I've spent, refining my art and becoming really good at this craft of coding or product development or whatever it may be, is all of a sudden fairly redundant, or there's a lot of overlap here. And so they have this moment of, what is my future relationship with work going to look like on the job? I think for others, outside of work, or we're looking ahead, as academics, thinking about the different roles that we have as teachers, as researchers, as institutional citizens, and seeing a lot of overlap between those, and seeing lots of with what AI can do, and then seeing a lot of AI changes, and so having these larger career epiphanies around that. But yeah, I think this feels like whereas the pandemic and the Great Resignation, because the vaccines came out sort of quickly, and the pandemic didn't come to necessarily a quick end, but there was this crescendo moment to it when the vaccines rolled out. AI, it seems like, even though it's moving quick, don't get me wrong, it's a slower wave, and we're having these slow realizations, or one after the next, of these changes that it brings. And so I think we're going to see these waves or ripples of AI jolts roll through as we realize what AI can do. And I don't want to, there's also positive jolts I mentioned as well. So in some cases, we're going to realize my job is going to get a lot better if AI takes this half of it away, and I can focus on this other half. So it may be positive jolts as well, or my side hustle that takes up a lot of time, I can actually do that more efficiently now, or this new venture that I'm trying to get off the ground. So there could be, there's going to be, I think, a lot of negative AI jolts, but I think there'll be some positive sprinkled in as well.
So I'm wondering if we can think about this from an organizational standpoint for a minute. Do managers have anything to do with this? Can they spot jolts or signs that someone's experiencing one? And does it matter if they do, in terms of maybe helping a person get to a better place without leaving?
Yeah, great question. Managers have a key role to play here, and they probably have more ability and more power to help employees navigate jolts than they think they do. So on the one hand, managers often have a bit of a crystal ball in that they can predict the jolts that are going to happen to certain employees. That's because leaders and managers are often the ones who are making these future organizational changes. They're planning on maybe changing work schedules, or they know about some sort of merger or an acquisition or something like that. And they can, whenever they're in those meetings where they're deciding on changes, they can have a little bit of an extra conversation and say, what employees are going to react especially strong to this? What employees may be jolted by this small change that we're deciding to make? And then they can do a little bit of work to listen to that employee and sit down and talk to them about, hey, this is happening. We're going to get you through it. Especially if this employee is a top performer, that's time well spent to think about, there's a jolt coming for this employee.
Yeah,
How do we
it
lessen the
does
impact?
feel like, okay, there's the natural portion, right? If we are the reason that the jolts created. But a lot of times I think of this as something that is, like you said, it comes from internal dissatisfaction, or the way that you're thinking about your job, or you're thinking about AI, or maybe something at home. And just this idea that these trigger points or these conversations are going on, and management, sometimes it's just, how are you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so as a manager, you don't necessarily, I mean, a lot of the times you're not going to see the jolts that are happening in people's lives because, as you point out, they're happening outside of work, they're happening in our minds. And so how can managers see these when they happen? It's exactly what you are pointing out, like asking employees, how are you doing? Not not how is your work going, just how are you doing? And then listening and spending the time listening to hear if employees are saying, you know what, I'm really struggling with this change, or I'm having trouble balancing this, or, I got another argument with, my daughter the other day, or something like that, and listening to these moments of friction that may represent jolts. Now, of course, you're not doing this just for instrumental reasons to make performance better. You're doing this to hopefully help the employee live a better life inside and outside of work. And again, to the point of like managers having more power than they may realize, there may be solutions to jolts or ways to minimize their impact by a simple change to an employee's schedule temporarily, or just listening to them and giving them some support. Or it may be that they're overwhelmed at the moment and you think, well, it's pretty easy for me to take these work tasks away and say, you don't need to do these right now. These are longer term sorts of things. So all of this falls under the general umbrella of job crafting, of relationship crafting. And not that managers can do it all, but they often can do a lot to help employees deal with these unexpected events, or these events that cause them to rethink their relationship with work.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads me to this other idea I was having as I was reading your book, that we we used to think of this in terms of black and white. So, I'm staying or I'm quitting, right? But a lot of jolts these days, I suspect, don't necessarily look like quitting. They actually look like I'm starting to think about something else. And it could be going to take some training and prepare for what's next. Or like you said, I think before, starting like something in your life that, a hobby or volunteering, or just making more time for things that are important to you, or maybe even a second career, right? A freelance opportunity or a business on the side.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like looking into the entrepreneurship research, we find that like a lot of the reasons entrepreneurs start new ventures is actually because something in a traditional career jolted them into considering starting this new thing. And I think if we looked into to people who are deep into hobbies and side hustles, or to your point, starting just a small career change. I'm in the marketing department, but maybe I'm more of a finance person. I know I can tell you early in my career, in probably my second year in the professional world, I was in logistics, and a major failure of mine told me that I'm probably better in this other area of the company than logistics. As much as I think I'm good at planning, it's not really working out for me. And so, yeah, these jolts can be big and lead to immediate major changes, or they can just lead you to think, I just need to bend the trajectory of my career a little bit. I need to open up this other avenue. And that avenue may be a road not taken earlier in life, or it could be, I'm just going to explore this a little bit and dabble in this and see how it makes me feel. So doing a little bit of experimentation with life. So yes, the stay or go are definitely not the only two responses to jolts. And often it enters us into this period of experimentation. What if I were to do something different? What would it be?
Yep, perfect. So I always wrap up with a request for a question versus an answer. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the biggest question we should all be asking ourselves these days about the future of work?
I don't know if this will be very original. That's a good question, but it probably comes to this. We have a lot of new technology, AI at all, headed our way, and so the question is, can this new technology lead us to have a better relationship with work. And that could be through making work more customizable so it fits with me better. It could be less work, a little bit less than we have now. But I think that's what's on a lot of people's minds is they grasp the power of the technology. And a lot of us are thinking, instead of just job losses, could we use this to make work better? And at the start of the book, I talk about that most people, 70% of people report that they would keep working even if they didn't need to for a paycheck. So people realize the value that work has in their lives, the meaning that it can provide, the happiness that it can provide. It's just the version of work that most people are getting is not quite what they would like it to be. And so my question is, can technology close that gap between the work that we want to do and the work that we are doing?
Perfect. And, I called this podcast The Future of Less Work because I think we should be thinking about less of what doesn't matter and what more of what does, right? So not necessarily the dystopian version of you won't have work, but more, what do you want to do and, how and how much?
Yep.
So
absolutely. Like what's the work that gives you the positive energy? Let's do more of that and less of the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you, Anthony, for joining me today. For more about Anthony Klotz and his book, Jolted, you'll find all the links in the podcast description. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, follow The Future of Less Work wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, your best people do not work because you tell them to. They do not work because you measure them on it. They work because they want to. Because by working for you, they're doing what's important to them in life. Till next time.